You don't have to be awake for any of this. That's the whole point, really. You can let your eyes close, let your shoulders drop, let the pillow take the weight of your head, and just let the sound of a voice carry you somewhere calm. There is nothing to write down, nothing to memorize. Nothing here that will be on a test in the morning. You can let all of that go. If you fall asleep somewhere in the middle of a sentence, that's not a failure. That's the design. The words will still be here, and if you wake up later and catch a little thread of them, that's fine too. But you don't need to hold on to anything. So if you're lying down, you might notice the places where your body is touching the bed, or the chair, or the floor. The back of your head, maybe. The curve of your spine. The heels of your feet. And if you notice that your jaw is tight, you can let it soften. If your hands are curled, you can let them uncurl. If your forehead is doing that thing where it's holding on to the day, you can let it smooth out. There's nothing to do now except rest. Before we go any further, one small thing. This is a calm walk through a subject, made for rest and for gentle learning. It isn't professional advice of any kind, medical or otherwise, so please don't lean on it for anything that matters, and please don't listen to this while you're driving, or while you're doing anything that needs your attention. Find somewhere safe, somewhere you can stop moving for a while. And if you'd like to come back to any of this while you're awake, the No Fluff Anatomy and Physiology Guide is at the link in the description, and it covers the same ground in a form you can actually read. But you don't need it tonight. Tonight you can just listen. Tonight the only job your brain has is to drift, and I'll do the talking, and we'll take a very slow walk through something that's actually quite wonderful when you look at it closely, how your body fits together, how all the little pieces of you add up to one whole person, lying there in the dark, breathing without having to think about it. Imagine, just for a moment, a single brick, one ordinary red brick. On its own, it's not much. It's a rectangle of baked clay. It can sit in a field and be a brick, and that's about all. But if you take that brick and put it next to another brick, and then another, and you add a little mortar in between, and you keep going carefully, row after row, you can build a wall. And if you build 4 walls and put a roof on top, you have a house. And a house is something very different from a brick. A house can keep you warm. It can keep the rain off. It can hold a family, and a kitchen table, and a bed. But if you look closely at the house, at its foundation, it's still made of bricks. Thousands and thousands of small, simple bricks, each one doing its own small, simple job, and together they make something much bigger than any single brick could ever be. Your body is like that house. It's made of tiny pieces, and those tiny pieces are made of even tinier pieces, and those are made of pieces so small you can't see them at all. And the way those pieces are arranged, the way they fit together, is what makes you a person instead of a pile of parts. That's what anatomy and physiology is, really. Anatomy is the study of what the pieces are and where they sit. Physiology is the study of how those pieces work together, how they move and change and keep you alive. One is the map and the other is the journey. And we're going to start with the smallest piece and walk all the way up, very slowly, very gently, all the way up to the whole you. The smallest living piece of you is called a cell. Now a cell is so small that you can't see one with just your eyes. If you took a single cell from the tip of your finger and put it on a table, you wouldn't see anything there at all. You'd need a microscope, which is a tool that makes tiny things look bigger, and even then, a single cell would just look like a soft, pale blob. But that soft, pale blob is alive. It's the smallest thing in your body that is truly, fully alive on its own. Everything smaller than a cell is just a part. Everything bigger is many cells working together. But the cell is the smallest whole unit of life. It's the brick. And a single cell is a busy little place. It's not just a blob of jelly. It's more like a tiny, soft bag, filled with even tinier parts, and each of those parts has a job to do. The outside of the bag is called the membrane. That's the skin of the cell, the wall around it. It decides what comes in and what goes out, a bit like a front door with a very picky doorman. If the cell needs food, The doorman lets food in. If the cell makes something it needs to get rid of, the doorman lets it out. If something harmful comes along, the doorman keeps it out, as best it can. Inside the cell, floating in a watery sort of fluid, there are little organs. Now, the word organ might make you think of a heart or a liver, and those are organs too, but inside a cell the organs are tiny, tiny structures that each do a specific job. We call them organelles, which just means little organs. There's one that makes energy, like a tiny power station. There's one that builds proteins, which are the small worker molecules that do most of the actual tasks in your body. There's one that packages things up and sends them to the right place, like a little post office. And in the middle of it all, there's a control center, a kind of library, where the instructions for the whole cell are kept. That control center is called the nucleus. The instructions inside it are written in a molecule called DNA, and that DNA contains the plans for building and running not just that one cell, but eventually, in combination with all the other cells, the plans for building and running you. But let's not get too deep into the inside of a single cell. The important idea right now is simpler, and it's this. One cell, on its own, can do quite a lot. It can take in food, turn that food into energy, grow, respond to the world around it, and even make a copy of itself. That's already impressive for something too small to see. But one cell can't hear a sound. One cell can't move a finger. One cell can't feel the warmth of a blanket. For those things, you need cells to work together, and that brings us to the next layer up. When a group of cells that are all the same type stick together and work together as a team, that's called a tissue. Now, in everyday life, the word tissue usually means the thin paper you use to blow your nose. And in an odd way, that's not a bad comparison, because tissue paper is thin and flat and made of lots of tiny fibers all pressed together, and a tissue in your body is also a thin, flat sheet of similar cells all pressed together. But tissues come in more shapes than just thin sheets. Some are stretchy, some are tough, some are soft and squishy. What makes them a tissue is that the cells are all the same kind, doing the same kind of job, grouped together in one place. There are 4 main kinds of tissue in your body, and it might help to think of them as 4 different fabrics, because the word tissue actually comes from an old word for woven cloth. The first kind covers things. It's the tissue that lines the outside of your body, and the inside of your mouth, and the inside of your stomach, and the inside of every hollow tube and cavity you've got. It's called epithelial tissue, and you can think of it as a sort of living carpet. It's there to protect what's underneath it and sometimes to let certain things through, like a good doormat that keeps the dirt out but lets the rain drip through. Your skin is mostly epithelial tissue, layer upon layer of it, all those cells packed tightly together, side by side, like cobblestones in a street, so that nothing unwanted can slip between them. The second kind of tissue holds things together and supports them. It's called connective tissue, and it's a bit like the packing material and the frame of your body all in one. Bone is a kind of connective tissue, which sounds strange, but it's true. Blood is a kind of connective tissue too, because it connects distant parts of you by carrying things from one place to another. Tendons and ligaments, which tie muscle to bone and bone to bone, are connective tissue. Even fat, the soft, cushiony stuff under your skin, is connective tissue. So connective tissue isn't just one thing. It's a whole family of tissues that all serve the same broad purpose, which is to hold you together and connect one part of you to another. If epithelial tissue is the carpet and the wallpaper, connective tissue is the timber frame and the glue. The third kind of tissue is the kind that moves. It's called muscle tissue, and it's made of long, thin cells that can contract, which means they can shorten themselves, pull themselves tight. When enough muscle cells pull tight at the same time, the whole tissue pulls, and when enough muscle tissue pulls, a part of you moves. The muscle tissue in your arm pulls on the bones in your arm, and your arm bends. The muscle tissue in your heart pulls in on itself, over and over, and your blood gets squeezed along. The muscle tissue in your stomach and your intestines pulls in waves, and your food gets pushed through. Muscle tissue is the engine of everything that moves inside you and outside you. And the fourth kind of tissue is the kind that talks. It's called nervous tissue, and it's made of cells called neurons, and their job is to carry messages. A neuron looks a little like a tree with a very long root. It has branches at one end that pick up signals, and a long, thin tail at the other end that sends signals on to the next neuron, or to a muscle, or to a gland. Nervous tissue runs through your whole body like a network of fine, living wires, and it's the reason your foot knows to pull away from something hot before you've even thought about it. It's the reason you can hear these words. It's the reason you can think at all. It's fast, and it's constantly busy, even while you sleep. So those are the four fabrics: the carpet, the frame, the engine, and the wires. Epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and nervous tissue. Each one is made of cells. Each one has a job, but even a tissue can't do very much on its own. A sheet of muscle tissue can twitch, but it can't pick up a cup. A strand of nervous tissue can carry a signal, but it can't decide where that signal should go. For that, you need the next layer up. You need tissues working together, and that's called an organ. An organ is a structure made of two or more different kinds of tissue, all working together to do a bigger job. Your heart is an organ. It's mostly muscle tissue, because it has to squeeze, but it's also lined with epithelial tissue on the inside, to make a smooth surface for blood to flow over, and it's wrapped in connective tissue to hold its shape, and it's threaded with nervous tissue to tell it how fast to beat. 4 different fabrics, all stitched together into one pump. That's an organ. Your stomach is an organ, your liver is an organ, your lungs, your kidneys, your brain, your skin itself, all organs. Each one is a collection of tissues, and each one does a job that no single tissue could do alone. And then the last layer up, the layer where everything starts to feel like a whole living creature, is the organ system. An organ system is a group of organs that work together to accomplish something even bigger. Your heart doesn't do its job alone. It works with your blood vessels, which are long tubes of tissue that carry blood all over the body. And together, your heart and your blood vessels and your blood itself form the circulatory system, which is the delivery network of the body. That system delivers oxygen and food to every cell you have, and picks up the waste they leave behind, and carries that waste away to be dealt with. And it does it all without you ever having to think about it once. There are other systems too. The respiratory system, which brings fresh air in and lets stale air out. The digestive system, which takes food apart and turns it into pieces small enough for your cells to use. The nervous system, which carries messages back and forth and is the closest thing your body has to a government. The skeletal system, which is the frame, and the muscular system, which is the movement. The endocrine system, which sends slow chemical signals through the blood. The immune system, which defends the place. The urinary system, which filters the blood and gets rid of liquid waste. The reproductive system, which makes new people. Each system is a team of organs. Each organ is a team of tissues. Each tissue is a team of cells. And that, in the gentlest possible terms, is how a body fits together. A body is a team of systems, and the whole thing, all of it, every layer, every cell, is you. But the wonderful thing, the thing that's easy to miss when you're awake and busy and thinking about 100 other things, is that all of this is happening right now, underneath you, while you lie there getting sleepier. Right now, without any help from you at all, your heart is contracting and relaxing and contracting again. Your lungs are filling and emptying, softly, on their own. Your blood is moving through a network of vessels so long that if you laid them all out end to end, they would wrap around the world more than twice. Your cells are taking in oxygen and turning it into energy. Your neurons are firing, not loudly, just quietly, keeping everything ticking over. Your skin is holding you in. Your bones are holding you up, even lying down. Your connective tissue is holding all of it together. And you don't have to do a thing. You can just let it happen. So we'll start the next part of this little walk with the very first layer, the cell, and look a little more closely at what goes on inside that tiny living bag, because that's where everything else begins. But not yet. For now, that's enough. That's more than enough. You can let it drift. You don't need to remember the 4 kinds of tissue. You don't need to remember the word epithelial, though it's a lovely word, soft and long, the kind of word that's nice to fall asleep to. You don't need to remember any of it, because your body, which already knows how to do all of this, will keep doing it all night long, and when you wake up, it will still be doing it, and none of this will have been a waste, because it was never a task. It was just a way to spend a little while before sleep, and you can let it go now, as easily as you let go of the day K. And if you think about it, every part of you, every single part, began as one cell. Just one, a single tiny bag of fluid, too small to see, carrying a set of instructions in its center. And from that one cell, through division after division after division, came all the others. The cells in your skin, the cells in your blood, the cells in your bones and your brain and the soles of your feet. Trillions of them now, by any reasonable estimate, though nobody has ever sat down and counted them all one by one. And every one of those cells is alive, in the way a small fire is alive. It takes in fuel. It gives off waste. It responds to the world around it. It keeps itself going, moment to moment, day to day. Some of your cells live only a few days. Some live for years. A few, in the lens of your eye and in parts of your nervous system, have been with you since before you were born, and will be with you until the end. But whether they last a week or a lifetime, they all share the same basic structure, the same quiet machinery of being alive. So let's look a little closer at that single cell, the way you might look at a small house from the outside and wonder what's in each room. The first thing to understand is that a cell is not a static thing. It's not a bead, not a pebble, not something solid and still. It's more like a tiny, busy workshop, always in motion, always making something, always moving something from one place to another. And the boundary of that workshop, the wall that holds it all in, is the cell membrane. Now the membrane is not a hard wall. It's soft and flexible, a bit like the skin on the surface of a soap bubble, and it's made of a special kind of molecule, a lipid, which is a fat, arranged in a double layer. If you could zoom in very close, you'd see 2 sheets of these fat molecules, with their water-loving heads pointing outward and inward, and their water-avoiding tails tucked in the middle. This arrangement means the membrane is very good at keeping water and dissolved things on the right sides. The watery fluid inside the cell stays in. The watery fluid outside the cell stays out. But the membrane isn't sealed shut. It's studded with proteins, little gateways and channels and doors, each one designed to let a particular thing through. Some channels are always open, like a gap under a door. Some open only when a signal arrives, like a locked gate with a bell. Some act as carriers, grabbing a molecule on one side and ferrying it to the other, like a little ferry crossing a river. And some act as name tags, identifying the cell to the rest of the body, so the immune system knows this cell belongs to you and should be left alone. That's the outside. Now step inside, through the membrane, and you find yourself in the cytoplasm. That's the general name for the cell's interior, the fluid plus everything floating in it. The fluid itself is mostly water, with salts and small molecules dissolved in it, a bit like a thin, warm soup. And floating in that soup are the organelles, the little organs of the cell. You can think of them as the rooms of the workshop, or perhaps as the appliances in a kitchen, each one with a specific job, and the whole thing humming along together. The biggest and easiest to spot is the nucleus. It sits near the center, roundish, like the yolk in an egg, and it's the cell's library, its safe, its control room. The nucleus has its own membrane, a double one, with little pores in it, and inside that membrane, coiled up in a very organized way, is the DNA. The DNA in a single human cell, if you could unwind it and stretch it out straight, would be about 2 meters long. That's a remarkable thing to imagine. 2 meters of instructions, folded and packed into a space so small you can't see it without a microscope. And those instructions are written in a chemical alphabet with just 4 letters, A, T, C, and G, arranged in a sequence billions of letters long. That sequence tells the cell how to build every protein it will ever need, and proteins, as we'll see, are the workers that do almost everything else in the body. The nucleus, then, is less like a busy manager and more like a reference book. It holds the recipes. It doesn't do the cooking itself. It sends out copies of the relevant pages when they're needed. Now, the copying of those pages and the reading of those recipes happens with the help of a molecule called RNA. RNA is like a photocopy of a small section of DNA. It's made in the nucleus, and then it travels out through one of those little pores into the cytoplasm, carrying a message. And the message is received by a structure called a ribosome. Ribosomes are tiny, almost absurdly tiny, just little clusters of RNA and protein, and they float in the cytoplasm by the millions, or they sit attached to the outer surface of another organelle. Their job is to read the RNA message and build a protein, amino acid by amino acid, following the sequence of letters, a bit like a machine reading a strip of punched paper and clicking beads onto a string in the right order. The ribosome is a construction site, and the protein it builds will be folded and shaped until it can do its particular job. The organelle that ribosomes often sit on, and the one that helps finish and package many proteins, is called the endoplasmic reticulum. That's a long name, and it's a big, folded, maze-like structure, a bit like a system of tunnels and flattened sacs, running all through the cell. The rough endoplasmic reticulum is rough because it's covered in ribosomes, like a corridor lined with workers. The smooth endoplasmic reticulum has no ribosomes, and it does different things, like making certain fats and helping to store calcium. But both of them, rough and smooth, are part of the cell's manufacturing and transport system. Once a protein is made, it often travels to yet another organelle called the Golgi apparatus. You can think of the Golgi as the cell's post office, or perhaps its shipping department. It receives proteins from the endoplasmic reticulum, does any final folding or trimming, adds a little chemical tag to say where the protein should go, and then packages it into a small bubble called a vesicle. The vesicle pinches off from the Golgi and travels through the cytoplasm to wherever the protein is needed. Maybe the protein belongs in the membrane. Maybe it needs to be exported out of the cell entirely, sent off into the bloodstream to do work somewhere else. The vesicle carries it there. It's a small parcel with an address label, moving through the cell's quiet traffic. But all of this work, the building and the packaging and the moving, requires energy. And the energy is made by an organelle called the mitochondrion. Mitochondria are sausage-shaped, with a smooth outer membrane and a deeply folded inner membrane, and they're often described as the powerhouses of the cell, which is an overused phrase but also a fair one. What a mitochondrion does is take the broken-down products of the food you've eaten, mainly a sugar called glucose, and combine them with oxygen, and in doing so, it produces a molecule called ATP. ATP is the cell's rechargeable battery. It's a small, portable packet of energy that can be spent almost anywhere in the cell to make things happen. When a muscle cell contracts, it spends ATP. When a neuron fires a signal, it spends ATP. When a ribosome builds a protein, it spends ATP. And the mitochondria make that ATP all day and all night in staggering quantities. A single cell can contain hundreds or even thousands of mitochondria, depending on how much energy it needs. Muscle cells, which work hard, have a great many. A fat cell, which mostly just sits and stores things, has fewer. But every living cell has at least some, because without them, nothing else would have the fuel to go on. There are other organelles too, smaller and less famous. Lysosomes are the cell's recycling and waste disposal centers, little sacs full of digestive enzymes that break down worn-out cell parts and foreign materials. Peroxisomes help break down fatty acids and neutralize harmful substances. The cytoskeleton is a network of protein fibers running through the cytoplasm, not an organelle enclosed in a membrane, but a kind of internal scaffolding, giving the cell its shape and allowing it to move and divide. And then there are little things like vesicles, tiny bubbles of membrane used for transport and storage, constantly pinching off one surface and fusing with another, like small boats moving between docks. All of this is happening in every one of your cells, right now, in the dark, while you listen and grow sleepier. The sheer amount of activity is difficult to hold in the mind. Each cell is a city, and your body is a continent of cities, and all of it is quiet, all of it is orderly, all of it is coordinated, and yet none of it requires your attention. You don't have to tell your ribosomes to build a protein. You don't have to remind your mitochondria to keep making ATP. You don't have to supervise the traffic of vesicles or the opening and closing of membrane channels. It all just happens, because the instructions are there, and the machinery is there, and the whole thing has been running this way since before you drew your first breath. Now, one thing worth saying, because it's easy to forget when you look at a neat diagram in a textbook, is that a real cell doesn't look like a diagram. A textbook shows you a tidy circle with a neat nucleus in the middle and a few carefully colored organelles floating in a clear space. A real cell is crowded. The cytoplasm is packed with things, jostling and bumping, more like a busy market than an empty room. The organelles are not arranged symmetrically. They're wherever the cell put them, and they move. The whole thing is soft and wet and slightly messy, in the way that living things tend to be. And that messiness is not a flaw. It's the source of its flexibility. A living cell can change shape, repair itself, respond to its environment, adapt. A rigid machine cannot. A soft, crowded, slightly chaotic living bag of water and protein can. That's the whole trick of being alive. And then, because living things don't last forever, cells have a way of making more cells. It's called cell division, and it's one of the most carefully controlled processes in the entire body. When a cell divides, it first makes a copy of all its DNA, so that each new cell will have a complete set of instructions. Then it lines up the copies, checks them for errors, and carefully pulls them apart to opposite ends of the cell. Then the cell pinches in the middle, the membrane seals itself off, and where there was one cell, now there are two. Each one smaller, each one carrying the same library, the same recipes, the same possibilities. Most of the cells in your body divide at least occasionally. Some divide constantly. The cells lining your intestine, for example, are replaced every few days, worn away by the passage of food, and endlessly renewed from below. The cells of your skin are constantly being shed from the surface and replaced from underneath. A cut heals because cells divide to fill the gap. A bone grows because cells divide at its ends, and so on. The body you went to sleep in last month is not exactly the body you went to sleep in tonight. Most of it has been quietly replaced, cell by cell, without you ever noticing. The shape is the same, the pattern is the same, but the bricks have been swapped out, one by one, while the house kept standing. And the pattern is what matters. The pattern is what makes you, you. Because every cell in your body contains the same DNA, the same 2 meters of instructions, and yet a skin cell and a nerve cell and a liver cell and a muscle cell look and behave completely differently. How does that happen? It happens because different cells read different parts of the instructions. It's like every cell has the entire cookbook, but a skin cell only ever opens the chapter on how to be skin, and a heart cell only opens the chapter on how to contract, and a liver cell only opens the chapter on how to filter blood. The chapters that aren't needed are kept closed, folded away, not read. And once a cell has settled into its role, it tends to stay there. That's called differentiation, and it's the reason your body can have so many different kinds of cells, all descended from the same original one, all carrying the same book, but each reading a different page. So that's the cell. A membrane to hold it together, a nucleus to hold the instructions, ribosomes to build the proteins, a Golgi to package them, mitochondria to power it all, lysosomes to clean up, a cytoskeleton to keep the shape, and a whole lot of salt water, moving slowly, carrying everything where it needs to go. It's the smallest unit of life, and it's already, on its own, almost incomprehensibly complex. And yet the next step up, the tissue, is not just more of the same. When cells of the same type come together and specialize as a group, they begin to do things that no single cell could manage. They begin to form sheets and cords and layers. They begin to make a substance around themselves, a kind of scaffolding and mortar, and that substance changes what they can do. And that's where we'll go next, in a little while. The 4 fabrics of the body, and how each one is woven. But for now, that's enough. You can let the cell rest. You can let it all rest. Your cells are not resting, not most of them, but you can. That's the division of labor, after all. They do the work, you do the sleeping, and the body, in its quiet wisdom, is perfectly happy with that arrangement. When you look at a woven cloth, really look at it, you can see the threads. They cross over and under each other, again and again, in a simple repeating pattern, and from that repetition a fabric emerges. It's stronger than the threads alone. It can stretch a little, or hold firm, or let air through, depending on how it was woven and what it was made of. A tissue in the body is something like that. It's a fabric, made not of cotton or wool, but of living cells, arranged in patterns, held together by the substance they make around themselves. And just as there are many kinds of cloth, there are many kinds of tissue, but if you step back far enough, you can group them into 4 great families, 4 basic fabrics from which the entire body is cut and stitched. The first of these families is the one that covers and lines. It's called epithelial tissue, and you have already met it, in passing, as the living carpet. But it deserves a closer look, because epithelial tissue is everywhere. It's on the outside of you, as the outermost layer of your skin, the part the world touches. It's on the inside of you too, lining your mouth, your throat, your stomach, your intestines, your airways, your bladder, and every other hollow space and tube and cavity you carry. Wherever the body meets a surface, wherever there's an edge between inside and outside, or between one compartment and another, you will almost always find epithelium. It is the border tissue, the wall and the door and the window of the body. The cells of an epithelium are packed very tightly together. They sit side by side, shoulder to shoulder, joined by little connections that hold them fast to one another. There's very little space between them, and very little material in the gaps. This tight packing is the whole point. It means that nothing can slip through the lining without passing through a cell first, and the cells can control what gets through. That's why epithelial tissue is so good at its main job, which is protection and selective passage. A layer of epithelial cells is like a fence made of living posts, so tightly fitted that the gaps between them barely exist. Anything that wants to cross has to be checked, molecule by molecule, and either let through or turned away. Not all epithelia are the same shape. Some are made of flat, thin cells, like paving stones, and these are called squamous cells. They form delicate linings where things need to pass through easily, like the tiny air sacs in your lungs, where oxygen slips across into the blood, or the inside of your capillaries, where nutrients and waste are exchanged. Other epithelial cells are cube-shaped, and they're found in places where secretion and absorption happen, like the tubules of your kidneys. Still others are tall and columnar, standing upright like pillars, and these line your stomach and intestines, where they absorb food and produce mucus. And some epithelia are piled up in many layers, like a thick winter coat, while others are just one layer thin, like a silk scarf. The type of epithelium in any given place tells you what that place has to withstand. The inside of your mouth has a many-layered squamous epithelium, tough enough to handle the scrape of food and the heat of tea. The lining of your lungs has a single delicate layer, thin enough to let gases cross with almost no effort. Same family, different weaves. Now, epithelial cells can do more than just sit there as a barrier. Many of them produce secretions, which means they make and release substances the body needs. Glands, in fact, are just epithelial tissue folded and specialized for secretion. A gland is a little pocket or tube of epithelial cells whose job is to make something and send it out, either onto a surface, like sweat onto your skin, or into the blood, like a hormone from your thyroid. So when you think of epithelial tissue, you can think of a living fabric that not only covers and lines, but also makes and releases. A border that is always busy, always tending the boundary between inside and outside. The second family is the one that fills and supports. Connective tissue, and of all the four families, this one is the most varied. If epithelial tissue is the carpet and the wallpaper, connective tissue is everything else that holds the building together. It's the frame, the mortar, the packing, the glue. It includes bone and cartilage and fat and blood, and the tendons that tie muscle to bone, and the ligaments that tie bone to bone, and the tough capsules that wrap around organs, and the soft, loose stuff that fills the spaces between them. All of these are connective tissue, and what they share is a common structure, even though they look wildly different from one another. The common structure is this. Connective tissue consists of cells scattered widely in an extracellular matrix, which is a term that just means the material between the cells, the stuff the cells make around themselves. In most tissues, the cells are the main event, and the material between them is a minor detail. In connective tissue, the matrix is often the main event. It's the matrix that gives bone its hardness, cartilage its springiness, blood its fluidity. The cells are important, of course, but they're relatively few, and they're separated by large amounts of the stuff they produce. You can think of it this way. If epithelial tissue is a brick wall, with the bricks packed tightly and a little mortar between them, connective tissue is like concrete, where the stones are scattered through a great volume of cement, and it's the cement that gives the whole thing its character. The matrix is made of two parts. There's a ground substance, which is a complex fluid or gel, and there are fibers, which are long proteins running through it. The main fiber you've probably heard of is collagen. Collagen is the most abundant protein in your body, and it's a tough, flexible, rope-like fiber that resists stretching. It's what gives tendons their strength and skin its resilience and bone its underlying toughness. There's also elastin, which does what it sounds like. It stretches and springs back, and it's found in places like your skin and your arteries and your lungs, where elasticity matters. And there's reticular fiber, which is fine and branching, forming delicate networks that support soft organs like the liver and the spleen. Different connective tissues have different mixes of these fibers and different ground substances, and that's why they behave so differently. Bone has a matrix loaded with hard mineral crystals, calcium phosphate, and so it's rigid. Cartilage has a firm, gel-like matrix with plenty of collagen and water, and so it's springy. Blood has a liquid matrix called plasma and almost no fibers at all, except when it's clotting, and so it flows. The cells of connective tissue also vary. Fibroblasts are the builders, making the fibers and the ground substance. Osteoblasts build bone, and osteoclasts break it down again, continually remodeling it. Chondroblasts build cartilage. Adipocytes are the fat storage cells, each one a little drop of oil wrapped in a thin skin of cytoplasm. And in blood, the cells are the red cells that carry oxygen, the white cells that defend, and the platelets that help the blood clot. So connective tissue is a whole world of its own, but the principle is always the same. Cells, scattered in a matrix, and the matrix doing much of the work. The third family is the one that moves. Muscle tissue, and muscle is very different from the other two. Its cells are long, sometimes extremely long, and they're packed with proteins that can slide past each other and pull, and when they pull, the cell shortens. That shortening is called contraction, and it's the only trick muscle tissue knows. But it's a very good trick, because almost every movement in your body comes from it. The beating of your heart is muscle. The movement of food through your intestines is muscle. The narrowing of your blood vessels to steer blood where it's needed is muscle. The blinking of your eyes, the turning of your head on the pillow, the slow rise and fall of your chest as you breathe, all muscle. There are 3 kinds of muscle tissue, and they're easy to tell apart. Skeletal muscle is the kind you can control. It's attached to your bones by tendons, and when it contracts, it pulls on those bones, and your body moves. Under a microscope, skeletal muscle cells have regular stripes, or striations, running across them, because the pulling proteins inside are arranged in very orderly repeating rows. These cells are also quite unusual, because they have many nuclei each. They're formed by the fusion of smaller cells during development, and so each one is a long, cylindrical, multinucleated fiber. You have hundreds of skeletal muscles, from the tiny ones that move your fingers to the great sheets of your back and thighs, and all of them work by pulling, never by pushing. A muscle can only shorten. When it relaxes, it lengthens passively, pulled back by an opposing muscle or by gravity. That's why muscles are often arranged in pairs, one to bend a joint and one to straighten it again, each one taking its turn. The second kind is cardiac muscle, and as the name suggests, it's the muscle of the heart. Cardiac muscle is also striated, with the same orderly rows of pulling proteins, but its cells are shorter and branched, and they're joined to one another by special connections that let electrical signals pass quickly from one cell to the next. That matters because heart muscle needs to contract in a coordinated wave, all the cells pulling together in the right order so that blood is squeezed out of the chambers efficiently. Cardiac muscle also has a built-in rhythm. It can contract on its own without any instructions from the nervous system, though the nervous system can speed it up or slow it down. And cardiac muscle never rests, not in the way skeletal muscle rests. It contracts about once every second, every minute, every hour, every day, for your whole life, and it does it without fatigue. It's a remarkable tissue, built for endurance beyond anything else in the body. The third kind is smooth muscle, and it's called smooth because it lacks the stripes. The pulling proteins inside are arranged more loosely, at angles, and under a microscope it looks plain. Smooth muscle is the muscle of the hollow organs and tubes. It's in the walls of your stomach and intestines, where it contracts in slow waves to push food along, a process called peristalsis. It's in the walls of your blood vessels, where it tightens and relaxes to control blood flow and blood pressure. It's in the walls of your bladder and in the iris of your eye and in the tiny airways of your lungs. Smooth muscle is not under your conscious control. You can't tell your intestines to squeeze or your blood vessels to dilate. It happens on its own, governed by the autonomic nervous system and by chemical signals. And smooth muscle is slow compared to skeletal muscle. It contracts more gradually, relaxes more gradually, and can hold a contraction for a long, long time without tiring. It's the patient muscle, the muscle that keeps things moving while you sleep. And the fourth family is the one that talks. Nervous tissue. Nervous tissue is made of just 2 main kinds of cells, neurons and glia. The neurons are the ones that carry signals. They're the long, branching cells that look like trees with very long roots, and they're specialized for one thing: communication. A neuron can receive a signal at one end, turn it into a tiny electrical pulse, and send that pulse racing down its length to the other end, where it passes the message on to another neuron, or to a muscle, or to a gland. The electrical pulse is called an action potential, and it's fast. In some neurons, it travels at over 100 meters per second, which is more than 200 miles per hour. That's why you can pull your hand away from something hot before you've even consciously registered the heat. The signal has already gone from your fingertip to your spinal cord and back again, while your conscious mind is still catching up. The glial cells are the support staff. For a long time, they were thought to be just packing material, the glue that held the neurons in place, and indeed the word glia comes from the Greek for glue. But glia do much more than that. Some of them wrap themselves around the long tails of neurons, forming a fatty insulation called myelin, and this insulation speeds up the electrical signals enormously. Other glia provide nutrients to neurons, or remove waste, or help fight infection, or regulate the chemical environment around the neurons so they can function properly. There are about as many glial cells in your brain as there are neurons, maybe more, and they're busy all the time, tending to the delicate, demanding cells that do the actual signaling. Nervous tissue is found mostly in the brain and the spinal cord, which together form the central nervous system, and in the nerves that fan out through the rest of the body, which form the peripheral nervous system. In the brain, neurons are organized into vast networks, billions of them, each one connected to thousands of others, forming a system so complex that it can generate thought, memory, emotion, intention, and the awareness that you are lying in the dark, listening to words. It's the most complicated structure in the known universe, and it's made of the same two cell types, neurons and glia, doing their small tasks over and over, 100 trillion connections humming quietly along. So those are the four fabrics: epithelial tissue to cover and line, connective tissue to support and bind, muscle tissue to move, nervous tissue to communicate, and every organ in your body is built from combinations of these four. A blood vessel, for example, is a tube with an inner lining of epithelium, a middle layer of smooth muscle, and an outer layer of connective tissue. 3 of the 4 fabrics, all in one structure. Your stomach has all 4, an epithelial lining, a muscular wall, connective tissue wrapping, and nerves running through it. Your skin has all 4 too, and when you put tissues together in just the right arrangement, you get an organ, a structure with a shape and a name and a job to do. But the step from tissue to organ is a big one, because an organ is more than just a bag of mixed tissues. An organ has architecture. The tissues are arranged in precise ways, folded and layered and shaped, so that the organ can do its job. The kidney isn't just a blob of epithelium and connective tissue and muscle and nerve. It's an intricately structured organ, with 1 million tiny filtration units, each one a little loop of epithelium and blood vessels, packed into a space the size of your fist. The lung isn't just a lump of tissue. It's a branching tree of airways, dividing 23 times, ending in hundreds of millions of tiny air sacs, each one wrapped in a net of capillaries. The heart is a 4-chambered pump, with valves and cords and thick muscular walls, all arranged so that blood moves in one direction and never backs up. That's anatomy. The shape, the arrangement, the architecture. And physiology is what happens when that architecture comes to life, when the pump squeezes and the air sacs exchange gas, and the tiny filters in the kidney sort the blood. The structure makes the function possible. The function gives the structure meaning. You can't separate them. That's why we study them together. And then the organs, of course, don't work alone. They work in systems. The heart works with the vessels. The lungs work with the diaphragm and the chest wall. The stomach works with the intestines and the liver and the pancreas. The kidneys work with the bladder. The bones work with the muscles and the joints. The brain works with the spinal cord and the nerves. And the systems, in turn, work with each other, so that the whole body functions as one thing, one integrated, self-regulating, self-repairing organism, lying there in the dark, breathing, digesting, filtering, pumping, thinking, dreaming, all at once, all without effort. That's the shape of it. Cells to tissues, to organs, to systems. A hierarchy of organization, each level built on the one below, each level doing things the level below could never do alone. It's a simple idea, and you can hold it in your mind without any effort at all, the way you might hold a smooth stone in your hand. And you don't need to remember it. It's enough to know, for now, that you are arranged, that you are put together, that there is an order to you, layer upon layer, from the smallest cell to the whole warm weight of you on the bed. The cells are dividing, the tissues are holding, the organs are working, the systems are coordinating, and you are allowed to simply rest in the middle of all that activity, carried by it, and let it go on without you. So now we have the pieces: cells, tissues, organs, systems. And the next thing to understand, the thing that turns a collection of pieces into a living body, is that the whole thing is constantly talking to itself. Every part of you is in communication with every other part. not through words, but through signals. Chemical signals, electrical signals, mechanical signals. A body is less like a machine and more like a vast, slow conversation, billions of voices speaking at once, and somehow, out of all that noise, a single coherent thing emerges. A heartbeat, a breath, a thought, you. Let's start with the electrical signals because they're the fastest, and they're the ones most people think of when they think of the nervous system. A neuron, as we said, carries a signal as a tiny electrical pulse. But it's not electricity the way a wire carries electricity. It's not a current of electrons flowing along a metal. It's a wave of charged particles, ions, moving across a membrane. The inside of a resting neuron is slightly negative compared to the outside. That difference is called the resting potential, and it's maintained by little pumps and channels in the membrane that carefully move sodium ions and potassium ions in and out. When a neuron receives a strong enough signal, channels open, ions rush across, and the voltage briefly flips, becoming positive on the inside. Then other channels open, and the voltage flips back. That quick flip and return is the action potential, the electrical pulse, and it travels down the length of the neuron, like a wave traveling down a rope that has been flicked at one end. When the pulse reaches the end of the neuron, it triggers the release of a chemical, a neurotransmitter, into the tiny gap between that neuron and the next. The chemical drifts across the gap, binds to the next neuron, and starts the whole process again. Electrical within the cell, chemical between cells. That's how the nervous system talks. And the nervous system talks very fast. A signal from your big toe to your spinal cord and back can complete its round trip in a fraction of a second. That speed is what allows you to react to things without thinking, to pull back from a sharp edge, to catch your balance when you stumble, to blink when something comes at your eye. These are reflexes, and they're handled by the spinal cord and the lower parts of the brain, without your conscious mind ever getting involved. By the time you're aware of what happened, the body has already dealt with it. That's a mercy when you think about it. Consciousness is slow. The body is fast, and the body protects itself first and tells you about it later. But the nervous system is not the only system of communication. There is another one, slower and older, and it works by chemicals released into the blood. That's the endocrine system. The endocrine system is made of glands, little clusters of epithelial tissue that produce hormones, and hormones are chemical messages that travel through the bloodstream to every part of the body, but only affect the cells that have the right receptor for them. You can think of a hormone as a letter sent to every address in a city, with a name on the envelope. Only the person whose name matches will open it. Everyone else simply ignores it. That's specificity. A hormone can flood the entire body and yet affect only a few target tissues, because only those tissues have the matching lock. The endocrine system is slow compared to the nervous system. A nerve signal can cross the body in 1/100th of a second. A hormone takes minutes or hours or days to build up and take effect. But its effects are longer lasting. A nerve signal is a quick tap on the shoulder. A hormone is a slow change in the weather. The nervous system handles things that need to happen now. The endocrine system handles things that need to happen over time. Growth, metabolism, reproduction, sleep, mood, the balance of salt and water in your blood, the level of sugar available to your cells, the response to stress. In the old, deep sense of the word, the sense of the body preparing itself for a long winter or a hard journey. All of these are governed, in part, by the slow chemical voice of the endocrine system. And these two systems, the nervous and the endocrine, are not separate. They meet at a small structure deep in the brain called the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is about the size of an almond, and it sits just above the roof of your mouth, and it is one of the most important structures in your body. It receives information from all over, from your blood, from your gut, from your skin, from your eyes and ears, from your own thoughts. And it responds by sending electrical signals down the nervous system and by releasing hormones that travel to the pituitary gland, which sits just below it, and the pituitary then releases its own hormones, which travel to the thyroid, the adrenal glands, the ovaries or testes, the liver, the bones, and so on. The hypothalamus is the bridge between the fast nervous system and the slow endocrine system, between the urgent and the enduring, between the moment and the season. It's the place where the conversation is coordinated. And what is the conversation about? Mostly, it's about keeping things stable. The body has a preferred internal state, a set of conditions it likes to maintain, and it works constantly, quietly, to keep those conditions within a narrow range. That's called homeostasis, and it's one of the most important ideas in all of physiology. Homeostasis means staying the same. Your body likes its temperature around 37 degrees, though it varies a little over the day and from person to person. It likes its blood sugar within a certain range. It likes its blood pressure high enough to push blood up to your brain when you stand, but low enough not to damage your vessels. It likes its pH, its salt levels, its oxygen levels, its water balance, all within careful limits. And to maintain those limits, it monitors everything, all the time, and makes small adjustments. The way it does this is through feedback loops. A feedback loop is a simple idea. Something changes, the body detects the change, and it responds in a way that brings the change back to normal. If you get too warm, sensors in your skin and in your brain detect it, and your body responds by widening the blood vessels near your skin, so more warm blood reaches the surface and heat can radiate away. It also makes you sweat, and the evaporation of sweat cools the skin. If you get too cold, the opposite happens. The blood vessels near the skin narrow, keeping warm blood deeper inside. You shiver, and the small movements of your muscles generate heat. You curl up, and the shape of your body conserves warmth. All of this happens automatically, without your deciding anything. The body reads the world, and the body answers, over and over, keeping you in the narrow band of conditions in which your cells can work. That's homeostasis. Most feedback loops in the body are negative feedback loops. The word negative here doesn't mean bad. It means that the response reduces the change. It pushes in the opposite direction. If temperature goes up, the response pushes it down. If blood sugar goes down, the response pushes it up. If carbon dioxide builds up in the blood, the response makes you breathe faster, blowing it off. Negative feedback is the body's brake, its thermostat, its steady hand. It's the reason you can go outside into the cold and come back into the warm, and through all of it, your deep internal temperature barely shifts at all. There are a few positive feedback loops too, but they're special cases, used only when something needs to happen quickly and completely. Childbirth is the classic example. The baby pushes against the cervix. The cervix sends signals that release a hormone called oxytocin. Oxytocin makes the uterus contract harder. The harder contraction pushes the baby harder against the cervix, and the loop escalates until the baby is born. Positive feedback is a snowball rolling downhill. It builds on itself, but the body uses it sparingly, because a positive feedback loop left unchecked would run away and destroy the system. Negative feedback is the rule. Positive feedback is the carefully timed exception. And all of this, the nerve signals and the hormones and the feedback loops, is happening while you sleep. In fact, sleep itself is a kind of homeostasis. The body needs to repair, to clear waste from the brain, to consolidate memory, to restore energy stores, to release hormones that drive growth and healing. While you lie there, drifting in and out, the hypothalamus is keeping time. The pituitary is sending out its slow messages. The cells are taking up sugar and using oxygen and making ATP, and the whole vast conversation goes on. You are not absent from it. You are the conversation. The body is talking itself into being, moment by moment, and it has been doing so since the first cells of you began to divide, and it will continue until the last cells of you fall quiet. You are not the listener, you are the listening, and that is enough of an idea to fall asleep to. Let's stay with the idea of communication for a while, because it's the thing that separates a living body from a mere collection of parts. A stone doesn't need to communicate with itself. A river doesn't need to regulate its temperature or monitor its salt levels, but a body does, constantly, and the nervous system is the fastest way it has of doing that. So let's walk through the nervous system itself, slowly, from its largest divisions down to its smallest parts, because it's the system that most directly shapes your experience of lying there in the dark, hearing words, feeling the weight of the blanket, gradually letting go of the day. The nervous system has two main divisions, and the distinction is easy to grasp. There's the central nervous system and there's the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system is the brain and the spinal cord. That's it, just those two structures, wrapped in bone, floating in fluid, weighing about 1.5 kilograms altogether. Everything else, every nerve that runs through your limbs and your organs and your skin, is the peripheral nervous system. So the central part is the core, the main office, and the peripheral part is the network of cables running out to every corner of the body. That's the first split. The peripheral nervous system can be divided further, and here the distinction is between the parts that carry signals about the outside world and the parts that carry signals about the inside world. The somatic nervous system is the part you use to interact with the world around you. It carries sensory information from your skin and your muscles and your joints into the central nervous system, telling you what you're touching, where your limbs are, whether you're warm or cold. And it carries motor commands out from the central nervous system to your skeletal muscles, telling them to contract. When you decide to roll over in bed, the decision starts in your brain, travels down your spinal cord, out through peripheral nerves, and ends at the muscles of your shoulders and hips and legs. That's the somatic system at work. The other branch of the peripheral nervous system is the autonomic nervous system, and this is the one that runs without your conscious help. Autonomic means self-governing, and that's exactly what it is. It controls the smooth muscle in your organs, the cardiac muscle in your heart, and the glands that secrete hormones and sweat and digestive juices. It's the system that keeps your heart beating, your lungs breathing, your stomach digesting, your body temperature steady, all while your conscious mind is off doing other things, or doing nothing at all, which is what it should be doing now. And the autonomic nervous system divides again into two branches that act in opposite directions, like two hands on the same steering wheel. One branch is called the sympathetic nervous system. The other is called the parasympathetic nervous system. You may have heard of the sympathetic system as the one that prepares you for fight or flight. That's a simplification, but not a bad one. The sympathetic system is the accelerator. It's what wakes you up, speeds your heart, opens your airways, releases stored sugar from the liver, dilates your pupils, and shunts blood away from your digestive organs and toward your muscles. It's the system of action, of alertness, of readiness. It's very useful in an emergency, and very useful in the morning when you need to get out of bed, but it's not what you want running the show at 1 a.m. The parasympathetic system is the other hand. It's the brake, the rest and digest system, the one that slows your heart, constricts your pupils, stimulates digestion, promotes salivation, and generally directs the body toward calm, repair, and restoration. When you settle into bed and let your breathing slow, you are tilting the balance from sympathetic to parasympathetic. The two systems are always active to some degree, both of them, in a kind of dynamic tension, and the state of your body at any moment depends on which one is more dominant. During the day, sympathetic activity rises and falls with your tasks and your stresses. At night, if all is well, parasympathetic activity gradually takes over, and the body shifts into its quiet mode. So when you lie there listening to a soft voice and letting your muscles go heavy, you're not doing nothing. You're actively signaling to your autonomic nervous system that it's safe to slow down. You're choosing the parasympathetic path just by resting. Now, all of this nervous system tissue, central and peripheral, somatic and autonomic, is made of the same building blocks, neurons and glia, and the neurons are the ones that carry the messages. Let's look at a single neuron more closely. It has 3 main parts, and each one does a different thing. The first part is the dendrites. These are the receiving branches, the little tree-like structures that extend out from the cell body and catch signals from other neurons. A single neuron might have thousands of dendrites, each one making connections with other neurons, so that the cell is constantly receiving a kind of chorus of incoming signals, some excitatory, telling it to fire, some inhibitory, telling it not to. The neuron adds all of these signals together, and if the excitatory input is strong enough to cross a threshold, it fires. If not, it stays quiet. That's the decision, and it's made hundreds of times per second. The second part is the cell body, or soma, which contains the nucleus and the usual machinery of the cell. It's the part that keeps the neuron alive, and it's where the incoming signals are summed. The third part is the axon. The axon is the long, thin tail that carries the outgoing signal away from the cell body and toward the next neuron, or toward a muscle or a gland. Some axons are very short, just a fraction of a millimeter. Others are extraordinarily long. The axon of a motor neuron that runs from your lower back to the muscle of your big toe is about a meter long, a single cell stretching almost the full length of your leg. And wrapped around many axons, like insulation around a wire, are the glial cells that form the myelin sheath. This myelin sheath is not continuous. It's arranged in segments, with small gaps in between, and the electrical impulse jumps from gap to gap, which is much faster than traveling along an uninsulated axon. That's why myelinated nerves conduct signals so quickly. The myelin is the body's way of speeding up the conversation. At the end of the axon, there's a structure called the synaptic terminal, or axon terminal, and this is where the message is passed on. The terminal contains tiny sacs filled with neurotransmitter molecules, and when the action potential arrives, the sacs fuse with the membrane and release their contents into the synapse, the small gap between the sending neuron and the receiving neuron. The neurotransmitter diffuses across the gap, binds to receptors on the other side, and the signal is passed along, chemically. Then the neurotransmitter is either broken down or taken back up, so the synapse is cleared and ready for the next signal. This happens trillions of times a second in your brain alone, a constant rain of molecules across microscopic gaps, and it is the physical basis of everything you've ever thought or felt or remembered. Different neurons use different neurotransmitters. Some are excitatory, making the receiving neuron more likely to fire. Glutamate is the main one, and it's used widely throughout the brain. Some are inhibitory, making the receiving neuron less likely to fire. GABA is the main inhibitory neurotransmitter, and it's the one that quiets the brain, calms the circuits, keeps the whole system from tipping into seizure and noise. And then there are the modulatory ones, like dopamine and serotonin and noradrenaline and acetylcholine, which shape the overall state of the brain, influencing mood and attention and wakefulness and sleep. When you drift off, the balance of these chemicals shifts. The wakefulness systems in the brainstem and the hypothalamus quiet down. The sleep-promoting systems take over. Neurons that were firing in rapid, complicated patterns during the day begin to slow, to synchronize, to settle into the slower rhythms of deep sleep. It's not that the brain turns off. It doesn't. It shifts its activity. It changes the conversation. And the brain itself, the great organ at the top of the nervous system, is not one thing but many, layered and folded and structured in ways that reflect its long evolutionary history. You don't need to know all of it, and you don't need to remember any of it, but it's worth a gentle look, because the brain is where all of this listening is happening. At its base, where the spinal cord enters the skull, is the brainstem. The brainstem is the oldest part of the brain, in evolutionary terms, and it handles the fundamental rhythms of life: breathing, heart rate, blood pressure, wakefulness, and sleep. Damage to the brainstem is catastrophic, because without it, the body cannot sustain itself. It's the engine room, the deep machinery, running below the level of thought. Behind the brainstem sits the cerebellum, a folded, cauliflower-shaped structure that means little brain. The cerebellum is concerned with movement, balance, coordination, and the fine-tuning of action. When you learn to ride a bicycle, or to touch your finger to your nose with your eyes closed, the cerebellum is what smooths the movement, corrects the errors, and stores the pattern for next time. It works beneath awareness, quietly adjusting everything you do with your body. Above the brainstem, in the center of the brain, are the structures of the limbic system, a collection of regions concerned with emotion, memory, and motivation. The amygdala is here, which is involved in fear and emotional salience. The hippocampus is here, which is critical for forming new memories. The hypothalamus is here, which, as we said, is the bridge between the nervous and endocrine systems, and the regulator of hunger, thirst, temperature, and the sleep-wake cycle. These structures are ancient in their own way, shared with other mammals, and they shape the flavor of experience, the feeling of being a body in a world that matters. And wrapped around all of this, covering it like a thick, folded blanket, is the cerebral cortex. The cortex is the outermost layer of the brain, a sheet of neural tissue about 2 to 4 millimeters thick, deeply folded to fit inside the skull. These folds are what give the brain its wrinkled appearance, and they exist because the cortex grew faster than the skull could accommodate, so it crumpled inward on itself, like a sheet of paper folded into a box. If you laid a human cortex out flat, it would be about the size of a large dinner napkin, and this thin sheet is where most of what we think of as higher thought takes place. It's divided into two hemispheres, left and right, connected by a thick bundle of fibers called the corpus callosum. Each hemisphere is further divided into 4 lobes. The frontal lobe at the front, concerned with planning and decision-making and personality and movement. The parietal lobe at the top, concerned with touch and spatial awareness. The occipital lobe at the back, concerned with vision, and the temporal lobe at the side, concerned with hearing and language and memory. And within these lobes there are maps. The motor cortex, running in a strip across the frontal lobe, contains a distorted map of the body, with more space given to the hands and the face than to the back or the legs, because those parts need finer control. The sensory cortex, just behind it, contains a similar map for touch. The visual cortex at the back of the brain contains a map of the visual field. The auditory cortex in the temporal lobe contains a map of sound frequencies. The brain is, among other things, a collection of maps, a vast atlas of the body and the world, drawn in living tissue. But you don't need to hold all of that. The point is simply this: your nervous system is a network of extraordinary complexity, built from the same basic materials: a neuron, a synapse, a chemical signal, repeated and repeated until it becomes something that can see and hear and remember and dream. And right now, at this moment, that network is processing the sound of these words, even if you're not fully attending to them. It's carrying the signals from the bed against your skin, from the temperature of the room, from the slow movement of your chest as you breathe. It's adjusting your heart rate and your digestion and your pupil size. It's beginning the long, gradual descent towards sleep as the wakefulness systems quiet and the parasympathetic tone rises. You don't have to do anything. The nervous system knows what to do. It has been practicing for your entire life, and it is very, very good at it. You can let it work. You can let it carry you. That's what it's for. If the nervous system is the body's fast communication network, then the chemical conversation of the blood is its slower, steadier counterpart. And the blood itself, that warm red liquid that moves through you from the crown of your head to the soles of your feet, is a tissue in its own right, a connective tissue, as we said earlier, with a liquid matrix. It's the river of the body, the transport system, the delivery service, and the courier. It carries oxygen from the lungs to every cell. It carries nutrients from the gut to every cell. It carries hormones from the glands to their targets. It carries waste from the cells to the kidneys and the liver for removal. It carries heat from the core to the skin. It carries the white cells of the immune system to wherever they're needed. It even carries the platelets that patch the leaks when a vessel is damaged. Blood is the great connector, and without it, every other system would starve in minutes. Let's think about what blood actually is. If you could take a small sample and let it settle in a tube, you'd see it separate into layers. The heaviest cells would sink to the bottom, a dark red layer made mostly of red blood cells. Above that would be a thin, pale layer of white blood cells and platelets, called the buffy coat. And above that, the top layer, a straw-colored liquid, would be the plasma. Plasma is the matrix of blood, the fluid part, and it makes up a little more than half of your blood volume. It's mostly water, about 90%, but dissolved in that water is a remarkable catalogue of substances. Proteins like albumin, which helps keep fluid in the vessels, and globulins, which include antibodies, and fibrinogen, which is involved in clotting. Electrolytes like sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, nutrients like glucose, amino acids, fatty acids, waste products like urea and creatinine, hormones, vitamins, dissolved gases. Plasma is a rich, complex broth, and it changes subtly from moment to moment, depending on what your body is doing, what you've eaten, how hydrated you are, what time of day it is. Your blood is a snapshot of your life, recirculated and refreshed every minute. The cells floating in the plasma are of three main kinds, and each has a distinct job. The most numerous by far are the red blood cells, also called erythrocytes. There are about 25 trillion of them in your body at any given time, which is a number too large to feel. Red blood cells are unusual because they have no nucleus. They lose it as they mature, which gives them their characteristic shape, a biconcave disc, like a little squashed donut. That shape gives them a lot of surface area for their size, and surface area matters, because the job of a red blood cell is to carry oxygen, and oxygen needs to cross the cell membrane. Inside each red blood cell are about 250 million molecules of hemoglobin, a protein that binds oxygen with a delicate, reversible grip. In the lungs, where oxygen is abundant, hemoglobin picks it up. In the tissues, where oxygen is scarce, hemoglobin lets it go. The oxygen-rich blood is bright red, and the oxygen-poor blood is darker, bluish red. And the red blood cells, carrying their cargo of hemoglobin, make this exchange possible. They're small, about 7 micrometers across, and so flexible that they can squeeze through capillaries half their width, folding and twisting as they go. A single red blood cell lives about 120 days. Then it's recycled, broken down in the spleen and liver, its iron saved and reused, its remaining parts turned into bile, and new red blood cells are made in the bone marrow at a rate of about 2 million per second. The body is endlessly rebuilding its blood. The white blood cells, or leukocytes, are far fewer, but they're the defenders. They're the immune system's mobile units, patrolling the blood and the tissues, looking for anything that doesn't belong. There are several kinds. Neutrophils are the first responders, quick and numerous, swallowing bacteria whole. Lymphocytes are the specialists, including T cells and B cells, which coordinate the immune response and remember past invaders. Monocytes become macrophages, the big eaters, which clear away debris and worn-out cells. Eosinophils and basophils are involved in allergic responses and in fighting parasites. White blood cells are larger than red blood cells, and they have nuclei, and they're capable of leaving the bloodstream entirely, squeezing between the cells of the capillary walls and wandering through the tissues, looking for trouble. When they find it, they signal for help, and the whole immune system mobilizes. That's the general idea. We'll come back to it in more detail when we talk about the immune system itself. For now, just know that your blood is full of quiet, watchful cells, always awake, always patrolling, even while you sleep. And then there are the platelets, which are not cells exactly but fragments of larger cells, called megakaryocytes, which break apart in the bone marrow. Platelets are tiny, much smaller than red cells, and their job is to help the blood clot. When a vessel is damaged, the platelets stick to the exposed tissue, change shape, and release chemicals that attract more platelets. They form a plug, and the plug is reinforced by fibrin, a protein made from fibrinogen in the plasma, which forms a kind of mesh. That mesh traps red blood cells and forms a scab, sealing the leak. The whole process is called hemostasis, and it happens within minutes, often without you ever knowing a small injury occurred. You get a tiny cut, and before you've even noticed it, the platelets have already done their work. The body is constantly patching itself. Now, blood doesn't move through the body on its own. It needs a pump and a system of tubes. The pump is the heart, and the tubes are the blood vessels, and together they form the cardiovascular system, which is the delivery network that keeps every cell supplied. Let's start with the vessels, because they're the roads, and then we'll come to the pump. The vessels come in three main types. Arteries carry blood away from the heart, veins carry blood back toward the heart, and capillaries are the tiny vessels in between, where the actual exchange happens. That's the simple version, and it's enough to get started. Arteries are built to handle pressure. The blood leaving the heart is under high pressure, because the heart has just squeezed it out with considerable force. So arteries have thick, muscular walls with a lot of elastic tissue. When the heart contracts, the large arteries stretch slightly, absorbing the surge, and when the heart relaxes, they spring back, smoothing the flow. That elastic recoil is what keeps blood moving between beats, and it's also what you feel as a pulse. The pulse is not the blood itself. It's the pressure wave, the stretching and recoiling of the arterial wall, traveling outward from the heart at about 5 meters per second. The arteries branch and branch again, getting smaller, and their walls get thinner, and eventually they become arterioles, tiny muscular vessels that control blood flow by tightening or relaxing. The arterioles are the adjustable nozzles of the circulation. When they constrict, blood is diverted away from that area. When they dilate, blood flows in. This is how the body directs blood where it's needed. To the muscles during exercise, to the skin when you're warm, to the gut after a meal, to the brain always. From the arterioles, blood enters the capillaries. Capillaries are the smallest vessels, so narrow that red blood cells have to pass through in single file, and their walls are just 1 cell thick, a single layer of endothelial cells, which is a type of epithelium. That thinness is the point. It means that oxygen and carbon dioxide, nutrients and waste, can diffuse across the wall quickly, moving from where they're more concentrated to where they're less concentrated. There are billions of capillaries in your body, a number again too large to feel, and they're arranged in dense networks called capillary beds, woven through every tissue. Very little of your body is more than a fraction of a millimeter from a capillary, and that's why every cell can be reached by the blood. The capillaries are the quiet, narrow streets where the real business of circulation happens. After the blood passes through the capillaries, it enters the venules, small veins, and then larger veins, and then it returns to the heart. Veins are different from arteries. They carry blood at much lower pressure, because most of the pressure has been spent pushing through the tiny capillaries. So veins have thinner walls, less muscle, less elastic tissue. But veins have a problem that arteries don't. They have to carry blood uphill, against gravity, especially from the legs. And they do this with the help of 2 things. First, veins contain one-way valves, little flaps that open to let blood pass toward the heart and close to stop it from flowing back. Second, the veins are squeezed by the muscles around them as you move. When you walk, the muscles of your legs contract and press on the veins, pushing blood upward, and the valves make sure it goes only one way. This is called the skeletal muscle pump, and it's one of the reasons movement is good for you. It keeps the blood from pooling in your legs. When you stand still for a long time, blood does pool, and that's why your feet can swell after a long day. When you lie down and sleep, gravity is no longer an issue, and the blood flows more easily back to the heart. And then there's the heart itself. The heart is a hollow, muscular organ about the size of your fist, sitting slightly to the left of center in your chest, behind the sternum. It's divided into 4 chambers. The 2 upper chambers are the atria, and the 2 lower chambers are the ventricles. The right atrium receives blood that has returned from the body, low in oxygen and high in carbon dioxide. From there it passes into the right ventricle, which pumps it to the lungs. In the lungs, the blood gives up its carbon dioxide and picks up fresh oxygen, then returns to the left atrium. From the left atrium it passes into the left ventricle, which is the strongest chamber, and the left ventricle pumps it out to the entire body. That's the full circuit, and it happens every time your heart beats. The heart has its own natural pacemaker, a small cluster of specialized cells in the right atrium called the sinoatrial node. These cells generate their own electrical impulses, rhythmically, about 60 to 100 times per minute at rest, and each impulse spreads through the atria, making them contract, and then through a conducting pathway to the ventricles, making them contract a fraction of a second later. That delay is important. It means the atria squeeze first, filling the ventricles, and then the ventricles squeeze, pushing blood out. The two sides of the heart contract together, the right side sending blood to the lungs, the left side sending blood to the body. The sound you hear as a heartbeat is not the muscle contracting. It's the valves between the chambers and the vessels snapping shut, one pair after the other. Lub-dub, all through the night. And the blood itself, of course, is carrying the oxygen that the lungs brought in. The lungs are the next stop on this tour, and they're a remarkable system in their own right. But we can let that rest for a moment. The heart is beating, the blood is flowing, the capillaries are exchanging, the whole delivery network is working, silently, in the dark, and you don't have to supervise any of it. You can just lie there and let the river move. It has been moving since before you were born, and it will keep moving, all through the night, carrying oxygen and glucose and hormones and warmth to every part of you, and carrying away everything you no longer need. That's circulation. That's life. And it asks nothing of you but rest. Now, let's talk about breathing. Not in the sense of a thing you should do or a technique you should practice, but in the sense of what is already happening, all on its own, while you lie there. Your chest rises and falls. Your diaphragm, a broad, dome-shaped muscle at the base of your ribcage, moves down and up. Air flows in through your nose or your mouth, down through your throat, into your windpipe, and out again, without your having to think about it once. You've been breathing since the moment you were born, and you'll keep breathing until the end, and for the vast majority of that time, you won't give it a single thought. That's the respiratory system at work, and it's one of the quietest, most constant rhythms in the body. The purpose of breathing is gas exchange. Your cells need oxygen to make energy, and they produce carbon dioxide as a waste product. Oxygen must be brought in from the outside world, and carbon dioxide must be carried out. The lungs are the interface where this happens. They're the place where the outside air and the inside blood come very close together, separated only by the thinnest of membranes, close enough that gases can slip across by simple diffusion. The lungs are not muscles. They don't pull air in by themselves. They're passive, spongy, elastic organs, and they're inflated and deflated by the muscles around them. The main muscle is the diaphragm, and when it contracts, it flattens and moves downward, increasing the space in the chest cavity. The pressure inside the chest drops, and air rushes in to fill the void. That's an inhalation. Then the diaphragm relaxes, the elastic lungs recoil, and air is pushed back out. That's an exhalation. Quietly, rhythmically, about 12 to 20 times a minute at rest, the whole cycle repeats. In and out, all night long. Let's follow a single breath as it travels. The air enters through the nose or the mouth. The nose is the better route because it's designed for the job. The inside of the nose is lined with epithelial tissue, richly supplied with blood, and covered with a thin layer of mucus. The blood warms the air. The mucus moistens it. And tiny hairs called cilia, which line the nasal passages, trap dust and particles, and sweep them toward the throat, where they can be swallowed and dealt with. The nose is a filter, a humidifier, and a heater all in one. The mouth can do the job too, but not as well. It's a backup entrance. From the nose, the air passes into the pharynx, the throat, a shared passage that also carries food on its way to the esophagus. Then it moves into the larynx, the voice box, where the vocal cords live. The vocal cords are two folds of tissue that can open wide for breathing or come together and vibrate when you speak. When you whisper, they're brought close but not quite vibrating. When you're silent, they're relaxed and open, letting the air pass freely. Then the air moves into the trachea, the windpipe, a tube held open by rings of cartilage so it can't collapse. The trachea branches into two main bronchi, one for each lung, and those bronchi branch again and again, smaller and smaller, like the branches of a tree. The whole branching structure is sometimes called the bronchial tree, and it's a good image. 23 generations of branching, from the wide trachea down to the tiniest airways, the bronchioles, which are less than a millimeter across. At the end of each bronchiole are clusters of tiny air sacs, like grapes on a vine. These are the alveoli, and they're the real site of gas exchange. Each lung contains about 300 million alveoli, and if you could spread them all out flat, they would cover an area about the size of a tennis court. That's the surface area of your lungs. It's folded and packed into the space of your chest, a vast interface between air and blood, hidden inside you. The wall of each alveolus is a single cell thick, and wrapped around each one is a net of capillaries, also 1 cell thick. So between the air in the alveolus and the blood in the capillary, there are just 2 thin cells, 2 membranes, about half a micrometer across. Oxygen diffuses from the air, where it's abundant, into the blood, where it's not. Carbon dioxide diffuses from the blood, where it's abundant, into the air, where it's not. That's the whole exchange. No pumps, no active transport, just diffusion, the natural drift of molecules from crowded places to uncrowded places, made possible by the thinness of the walls and the vastness of the surface area. The oxygen that crosses into the blood is mostly picked up by hemoglobin in the red blood cells, as we said. Each hemoglobin molecule can carry 4 oxygen molecules, and it binds them loosely, the way you might hold 4 small parcels under one arm. In the lungs, where oxygen is plentiful, hemoglobin loads up. In the tissues, where oxygen has been used and the pressure is low, hemoglobin lets go. The oxygen then diffuses into the cells, and the cells use it in the mitochondria to make ATP. That's the link between breathing and energy. Every breath you take is feeding your cells, and every breath out is carrying away their exhaust. The carbon dioxide in the blood is carried in a few forms. Some of it is dissolved directly in the plasma, some of it binds to hemoglobin, but most of it is converted, with the help of an enzyme, into bicarbonate ions, which are carried in the plasma. When the blood reaches the lungs, the reaction reverses, and the carbon dioxide diffuses into the alveoli and is breathed out. Carbon dioxide is not just a waste product, it's also a crucial regulator of breathing. The respiratory center in the brainstem monitors the level of carbon dioxide in the blood, and when it rises, the center increases the rate and depth of breathing. When it falls, breathing slows. You breathe because your cells are producing carbon dioxide, and your brain is keeping the levels steady. That's the primary drive. It's not lack of oxygen that makes you feel the need to breathe. It's the buildup of carbon dioxide. Which is why, when you take a long, slow breath and let it out gently, you're not just calming your mind, you're also lowering the carbon dioxide in your blood, telling your brain that all is well, letting the whole system relax a little further. Now, the lungs are not alone in the chest. They're surrounded by a double-layered membrane called the pleura. One layer lines the inside of the chest wall, and the other layer covers the surface of the lungs. Between them is a thin film of fluid that allows the 2 layers to slide smoothly against each other as the lungs expand and contract. The pressure in this pleural space is slightly negative, which means the lungs are held gently against the chest wall, like 2 wet sheets of glass stuck together. When the chest expands, the lungs expand with it. When the chest relaxes, the lungs relax. It's a quiet, elegant mechanism, and it works every single time, from the first breath to the last. And the respiratory system, like everything else, is regulated by the autonomic nervous system. The sympathetic branch, the alert branch, opens up the airways when you need more air, during exercise or stress. The parasympathetic branch, the rest branch, keeps them calm and gently constricted at rest, and the airways themselves have smooth muscle in their walls, which can tighten or relax to control airflow. In asthma, this smooth muscle tightens too much, and the airways narrow, making it harder to breathe. The body is always regulating, always adjusting, and sometimes the adjustment goes too far in one direction, but that's the nature of a living system. It's not perfect, it's adaptive, and adaptation is always a negotiation. While you sleep, your breathing changes. It slows. It becomes more regular, especially in deep sleep, and your body's response to carbon dioxide becomes a little less sensitive, which is normal. Your ribcage rises and falls, your diaphragm moves, your alveoli exchange gas, your blood carries oxygen and carbon dioxide to and from every corner of you. It's an old rhythm, older than speech, older than thought, and you share it with every mammal and bird and reptile, this slow, tidal exchange with the air. It connects you to the outside world in a way that never stops. You are not sealed off from the world. You are open to it, breathing it in, breathing it out, taking a little of it into your blood with every inhalation, giving a little of yourself back with every exhalation. That's a rather lovely thought to fall asleep to, actually. You are not separate from the air around you. You are in constant conversation with it. Every breath is a small exchange, and every exchange is life. And the oxygen that your blood carries is not the only thing your cells need. They also need fuel, and fuel comes from food. That's where the digestive system comes in, and that's the next long, slow journey to follow. But not just yet. For now, you can just breathe. You don't need to make it slow or deep or even. Your body knows how to do it. It has been doing it all along, and if you like, you can notice it, just lightly, the way you might notice the tide coming in and going out, without trying to change it. The rise, the fall, the little pause at the top, the little pause at the bottom, the cool air at the entrance to your nose, the warmth as it leaves. These are the edges of the breath, the shape of it, and you can let them be exactly as they are. The respiratory system is working, the blood is carrying, the cells are fed, and you are allowed to let all of it go and drift. Now, from the air we take in to the food we take in. The digestive system is another long, quiet journey, but instead of carrying gases, it carries the raw materials the body needs to build and repair and fuel itself. And the journey begins with a thought or a smell, or sometimes just the memory of a smell. You catch the scent of bread toasting, or you think about a lemon being cut, and something shifts, your mouth waters. That's the digestive system starting, before any food has even arrived. The body is already preparing, already anticipating, because digestion is not a single event. It's a long, coordinated process that begins before you eat and continues for hours after. Let's follow a small amount of food, something simple, a piece of bread, say, or a spoonful of rice. It enters the mouth, and the mouth is the first organ of digestion. The teeth break it apart, grinding and tearing, increasing its surface area, because the enzymes that will digest it need access to as much of it as possible. The tongue moves the food around, mixing it with saliva. Saliva comes from 3 pairs of salivary glands, and it's mostly water, but it also contains mucus to lubricate the food, and an enzyme called amylase, which begins the breakdown of starch into sugar. That's why a piece of bread, if you hold it in your mouth for a while, begins to taste sweet. The amylase is already working, splitting the long starch molecules into smaller sugars. The mouth is not just a grinder, it's the first chemical step. When you swallow, the food, now soft and moist and called a bolus, is pushed to the back of the throat by the tongue, and then the swallowing reflex takes over. The bolus enters the esophagus, a muscular tube about 25 centimeters long, which runs down behind the trachea and through the diaphragm into the stomach. The esophagus doesn't just let the food fall. It actively pushes it along, using waves of muscle contraction called peristalsis. The muscle behind the bolus contracts, the muscle ahead relaxes, and the bolus is squeezed downward, a little like toothpaste moving through a tube. This takes only a few seconds, and it works even if you're upside down. You don't need gravity to swallow. The smooth muscle does the work. At the bottom of the esophagus, there's a ring of muscle called the lower esophageal sphincter, a gate that opens to let food into the stomach and closes to keep it from coming back up. When that gate is loose or weak, stomach acid can splash up into the esophagus, and that's the feeling of heartburn. It's not the heart at all. It's the esophagus complaining. But when everything is working as it should, the gate opens, the food passes through, and it closes again behind it. The stomach is a muscular bag, shaped a bit like a J, and it can hold about 1 liter to 1.5 liters when full, though it's usually not full. The walls of the stomach are made of smooth muscle, arranged in 3 layers, and those muscles churn the food, mixing it with gastric juice. Gastric juice is produced by glands in the stomach lining, and it contains 2 main things: hydrochloric acid, which is strong enough to kill most of the bacteria that enter with the food, and to unfold proteins so they can be digested, and an enzyme called pepsin, which begins breaking proteins into smaller fragments. The stomach also produces a thick layer of mucus, which protects its own lining from the acid. The stomach is essentially a bag of acid and enzymes, and it would digest itself if not for that protective layer. The food is churned and mixed and broken down, and after an hour or 3, depending on what it was, it becomes a thick, acidic liquid called chyme. Then the pyloric sphincter, another gate at the bottom of the stomach, opens in small amounts, letting chyme pass into the small intestine a few milliliters at a time. The small intestine is the longest part of the digestive tract, about 6 meters in an adult, though it's coiled and folded to fit inside the abdomen. And it's here that most of the actual digestion and absorption happens. The first part of the small intestine, the duodenum, receives the chyme, and almost immediately, 2 things are added: bile, which is made in the liver and stored in the gallbladder, and pancreatic juice, which is made in the pancreas. Bile doesn't digest fats itself, but it emulsifies them, breaking the large fat droplets into tiny ones so that the enzymes can reach them. It's like washing up liquid with grease. The pancreatic juice contains a battery of enzymes, including amylase for starch, protease for protein, and lipase for fat. It also contains bicarbonate, which neutralizes the acid from the stomach, so the small intestine isn't damaged. The small intestine itself has enzymes in its lining too, and together, all of these break the food down into its smallest absorbable parts. Starches become simple sugars, proteins become amino acids, fats become fatty acids and glycerol. And the small intestine is built for absorption. Its inner surface is not flat, it's folded into ridges, and the ridges are covered with tiny finger-like projections called villi, and each villus is covered with even tinier projections called microvilli. This is another way the body creates surface area, just like the alveoli in the lungs. If you could spread the absorptive surface of the small intestine out flat, it would cover about the area of a tennis court, maybe more. Across that surface, the nutrients diffuse or are actively transported into the blood and lymph. The sugars and amino acids go into the blood, to the liver, where they're processed and distributed. The fats go into the lymph first, and then into the blood, and from there, the body's cells take what they need. What's left after the small intestine has absorbed everything useful is a watery mixture of fiber, dead cells, and undigested material. This passes into the large intestine, also called the colon, which is wider but much shorter, about 1.5 meters. The large intestine's main job is to reclaim water and salts, and to house a vast community of bacteria, the gut microbiome. Those bacteria, Trillions of them feed on the fiber that we can't digest, and in return they produce vitamins and other useful compounds, and they crowd out harmful bacteria. The large intestine slowly forms the remaining material into feces, which are stored in the rectum and eventually eliminated. The whole journey, from mouth to end, takes somewhere between 24 and 72 hours, depending on the person and the food. And then the body is ready to begin again. All of this is controlled, in part, by the enteric nervous system, a network of neurons embedded in the walls of the digestive tract. The enteric nervous system is sometimes called the second brain because it can operate independently of the brain in your head. It coordinates peristalsis, regulates blood flow to the gut, controls secretions, and communicates with the central nervous system through the vagus nerve. When you feel butterflies in your stomach, that's the enteric nervous system responding to the state of your brain. When you're relaxed and full and sleepy after a meal, that's the parasympathetic system increasing activity in the gut. Digestion is not something you decide to do. It's something the body does, on its own, with its own local intelligence, and it does it best when you're calm. The liver deserves a little more attention because it's the body's great chemical processing plant, and it sits quietly in the upper right side of your abdomen, just under the ribs. It weighs about 1.5 kilograms, and it performs over 500 known functions. It receives the blood from the intestines, rich in freshly absorbed nutrients, and it decides what to do with them. It stores glucose as glycogen and releases it when blood sugar drops. It stores vitamins and minerals. It manufactures blood proteins, including albumin and clotting factors. It makes bile. It breaks down old red blood cells and recycles their iron. It detoxifies substances, including alcohol and drugs, and the byproducts of metabolism. It converts ammonia, a toxic waste product, into urea, which the kidneys can excrete. The liver is a quiet, tireless organ, and it can regenerate. If a large part of it is removed, the remainder can grow back to full size. It's one of the few organs in the body with that ability, and it works, day and night, without ever drawing attention to itself. And then there are the kidneys, which handle the liquid waste, and they too are quiet and tireless. The kidneys are a pair of bean-shaped organs, about the size of your fist, sitting against the back wall of the abdomen, one on each side. Their job is to filter the blood, removing waste products and excess water and salts, and to produce urine. Each kidney contains about 1 million tiny filtration units, called nephrons, and each nephron is a little tube with a knot of capillaries at one end. Blood flows through the capillary knot, and water and small molecules are squeezed out into the tube. Then, as the fluid passes along the tube, the kidney reclaims what the body needs: water, glucose, sodium, potassium, all carefully reabsorbed. What's left is urine, which drains from the kidneys into the bladder through 2 tubes called ureters. The bladder stores the urine until it's convenient to release it, and then the urethra carries it out. The kidneys also do more than filter. They regulate blood pressure by controlling the volume of fluid in the blood. They regulate the balance of electrolytes. They produce a hormone called erythropoietin, which stimulates red blood cell production. They activate vitamin D. They help maintain the pH of the blood. Like the liver, the kidneys are essential, and like the liver, they work quietly, all day and all night without complaint. And all of these systems are connected. The blood carries oxygen from the lungs and nutrients from the gut. The liver processes those nutrients and sends them on. The kidneys filter the blood and keep its composition steady. The hormones from the endocrine system tell the liver and the kidneys and the gut what to do. The nervous system coordinates the timing and the pace. Nothing in the body works in isolation. It's all one web, one flowing, self-regulating whole. When you eat, the digestive system talks to the endocrine system, which talks to the nervous system, which talks to the cardiovascular system, which delivers the nutrients to the muscles and the brain. It's a conversation that began before you were born and will continue after you fall asleep. And you, the conscious you, the you that is lying there listening to these words, are not the one running it. You are the one resting inside it, carried by it, fed by it, kept alive by it. That's the deal. You rest. It works. And both of you are the same thing, really, just seen from different angles. Now, let's consider the frame. The body, for all its softness and wetness and movement, has a shape. It holds itself up against gravity. It moves through the world. It protects the organs inside. And all of that is made possible by the skeleton, the hard, living framework that lies beneath everything else. The skeleton is not dead. That's a common mistake. Bones are not inert sticks of chalk. They're living tissue, as alive as your heart or your liver, full of blood vessels and nerves and cells that are constantly building and breaking down and rebuilding. Bone is a kind of connective tissue, as we said earlier, with a matrix that has been hardened by mineral crystals, mostly calcium and phosphate. But it's not static. It's dynamic, responsive, constantly remodeling itself in response to the demands you place on it. Every time you stand, every time you walk, every time you lie down in bed and let the weight come off your spine, your bones are sensing it and adapting. The human skeleton has 206 bones in an adult, give or take a few small ones, and they come in many shapes. Long bones, like the femur in your thigh and the humerus in your upper arm, are levers. Flat bones, like the sternum and the ribs and the cranial bones of the skull, are shields. Short bones, like the ones in your wrist, are load spreaders. Irregular bones, like the vertebrae, are shaped for their particular jobs. And all of them together serve three main purposes: support, protection, and movement. They support the body's weight and hold it upright. They protect the delicate organs, the brain inside the skull, the spinal cord inside the vertebral column, the heart and lungs inside the rib cage. And they provide the rigid levers that muscles pull on to create movement. Without bones, the muscles would have nothing to work against. You'd be a soft, shapeless sack, unable to stand or reach or walk or even lift your head. Let's look at a single long bone, because it's a good example of how bones are built. The shaft of a long bone is called the diaphysis, and it's mostly compact bone, dense and hard, arranged in concentric rings around a central canal. The ends are called the epiphyses, and they're mostly spongy bone, which is lighter and has a honeycomb structure, with spaces filled with red bone marrow. The outer surface of the bone is covered by a membrane called the periosteum, which contains blood vessels and nerves and the cells that build and break down bone. Inside the shaft is the medullary cavity, which contains yellow bone marrow, mostly fat. And in the spongy ends, the red marrow is busy making blood cells, millions of them every second. Bone is not just a frame, it's also a factory. The cells inside bone are specialized. Osteoblasts are the builders. They produce the collagen matrix and then deposit the mineral crystals that harden it. Osteoclasts are the demolitions team. They break down bone, releasing calcium and phosphate back into the blood. And osteocytes are the mature bone cells, embedded in the matrix, sensing the mechanical load and sending signals that tell the other cells where to build and where to remove. This is why bone remodels. If you lift weights, the bones that bear the load respond by getting denser. If you spend a long time in bed, the bones lose some of their density because the load is gone. The body is efficient. It keeps what's needed and lets go of what isn't. So even lying there, resting, your bones are being maintained, not because you're asking them to, but because they're alive. The places where bones meet are the joints, and joints come in many varieties, from the fixed seams of the skull to the freely moving hinge of the elbow to the ball and socket of the hip. Movable joints are engineering marvels. The ends of the bones are covered with a smooth layer of cartilage, which reduces friction. The whole joint is enclosed in a capsule of connective tissue, lined with a membrane that produces synovial fluid, a slippery liquid that lubricates the surfaces, like oil in an engine. Ligaments, tough bands of connective tissue, hold the bones together and limit their movement. Tendons, which are similar but attach muscle to bone, transmit the pull of the muscle across the joint, and the whole thing moves with a quiet, effortless ease that we rarely notice until it's injured. A healthy joint is silent. You don't hear your knees when you walk. You don't feel your shoulder when you reach for a glass. The system just works. And the muscles that move those joints are just as remarkable. We've spoken about muscle tissue already, but let's think about how muscles work in the body. A skeletal muscle is an organ made of muscle tissue wrapped in connective tissue, with blood vessels and nerves running through it. It attaches to bone at both ends, usually via tendons. One attachment is called the origin, and it's typically the more fixed point. The other is the insertion, and it's the point that moves. When the muscle contracts, it pulls the insertion toward the origin, and the bone moves. The biceps muscle in your upper arm originates on the shoulder blade and inserts on the radius, one of the bones of the forearm. When it contracts, it pulls the forearm up, bending the elbow. The triceps, on the back of the arm, does the opposite. Muscles work in opposing pairs, one flexing, the other extending, and the body coordinates them perfectly, even in the simplest movement. Inside a skeletal muscle, the tissue is organized into bundles within bundles. The whole muscle is wrapped in connective tissue, and inside it are fascicles, bundles of muscle fibers, and inside each fiber are myofibrils, long protein cables that run the length of the cell. The myofibrils are made of repeating units called sarcomeres, and the sarcomeres are where contraction happens. They contain two kinds of protein filaments, thick ones made of myosin and thin ones made of actin. When a nerve impulse arrives, calcium is released inside the cell, and the filaments slide past each other, pulling the ends of the sarcomere closer together. Multiply that by millions of sarcomeres, and the whole muscle shortens. That's a contraction. It's powered by ATP, and it generates heat as a byproduct, which is why you shiver when you're cold. The body is using muscle contraction to warm itself. Muscles also maintain tone, a slight, constant state of contraction that keeps them ready to act and helps hold the body's posture. Even when you're lying completely still, your muscles are not completely relaxed. They're holding a little tension, just enough to keep your head aligned and your spine gently curved. This is what allows you to sit up, to turn over, to change position in your sleep without having to wake fully. It's all happening below the surface, coordinated by the cerebellum and the spinal cord, using feedback from sensors in the muscles and tendons. And then there is the skin, the largest organ of the body, the one that covers all of this. The skin is the boundary between you and everything else. It's an organ made of all four tissue types, and it covers an area of about 1.5 to 2 square meters in an adult, weighing around 4 to 5 kilograms. It's the first line of defense, the thing that keeps the outside out and the inside in, and it's very, very good at its job. The skin has 3 main layers. The outer layer is the epidermis, the tough, waterproof surface made of epithelial cells, which are constantly being shed and replaced from below. The middle layer is the dermis, which contains blood vessels, nerve endings, sweat glands, oil glands, hair follicles, and the collagen and elastin fibers that give skin its strength and elasticity. The deepest layer is the hypodermis, or subcutaneous layer, which is mostly fat, providing insulation and cushioning. The skin regulates body temperature by controlling blood flow and by producing sweat. It senses the world through a dense network of receptors that detect touch, pressure, heat, cold, and pain. It synthesizes vitamin D when sunlight hits it. It repairs itself when it's cut, and it does all of this quietly, constantly, without drawing attention to itself. The skin is also, in a way, the body's address. It's where you end and the world begins, and that boundary is not a simple line. It's a living, breathing, sensing organ, porous and responsive, letting some things through and keeping others out. It's the organ of contact, the place where you touch and are touched. And at night, in bed, it's the skin that feels the warmth of the blanket, the coolness of the pillow, the weight of the air. It's the skin that registers comfort and sends that message inward and tells the rest of you that it's safe to rest. So the body is framed and covered and filled with moving parts, bones to hold it up, joints to let it bend, muscles to make it move, skin to wrap it all. And underneath all of that, the quiet chemical machinery of the organs, the lungs breathing, the heart beating, the gut digesting, the kidneys filtering, the liver processing, the blood carrying, the nerves signaling, the hormones whispering. It's a whole world, a complete and self-sustaining world, and it's been running itself since before you could name any of its parts. You are the inhabitant of this world, and also its expression, and also, in a way that's hard to put into words, you are the world itself. The body is not something you have, it's something you are. And all of it, at this moment, is asking nothing more of you than to lie still and let it be. That's what it does best, after all. It knows how to keep going, it knows how to rest, and it knows how to bring you, slowly, gently, towards sleep. Now that we have walked through the whole body, from the single cell to the skin that covers it all, it might be worth pausing, very gently, on the idea of the body as one thing. Not as a collection of systems, each in its own box, but as a single, unified, living whole, where every part is touching every other part, and everything is influencing everything else. Because that is, in the end, the most important thing to understand about anatomy and physiology. The systems we have described, the nervous system, the cardiovascular system, the respiratory system, the digestive system, the skeletal system, the muscular system, the skin, the endocrine system, the immune system, are not separate. They are ways of looking. They are chapters in a book. But the body itself is not divided into chapters. It is one long, continuous story, and all of it is happening at once. Think of it this way. You take a breath. The air enters your nose, is warmed and filtered, travels down your trachea, into your bronchi, into your alveoli. Oxygen diffuses into your blood. Your heart, which has been beating all along, pushes that blood through your arteries, through your capillaries, into the tissues of your brain and your liver and your muscles. The oxygen enters your cells, and your mitochondria use it to make ATP. The ATP powers the contraction of your muscles, the firing of your neurons, the building of proteins. The carbon dioxide produced by those cells diffuses back into your blood, travels to your lungs, and you breathe it out. That single breath, that one ordinary breath, involved the respiratory system, the cardiovascular system, the muscular system, the nervous system, and the cellular machinery of every tissue in your body. And it happened in a few seconds, while you were lying there, not thinking about it. That's integration. That's the body working as one. And the body is always doing this constant weaving together of its many parts. When you eat, the digestive system breaks down the food, the blood carries the nutrients to the liver processes them and sends them on, the pancreas releases insulin to help the cells take up glucose, the kidneys adjust the balance of water and salts, the bones store calcium and release it as needed, the muscles use the glucose to move, the fat cells store the excess for later. All of it coordinated, all of it balanced, all of it adjusting to the needs of the moment. This is homeostasis, and it is the fundamental principle of physiology. The body's job is not to be perfect, it's to keep things steady enough, in a changing world, so that the cells can keep working. And it does this by constant, quiet communication, by feedback loops and adjustments, by millions of tiny decisions made every second, below the level of awareness. And you, the conscious you, are part of this too, though not in the way you might think. Your thoughts and your emotions are not separate from your body, they are expressions of it. When you feel calm, that's your parasympathetic nervous system, your slow breathing, your steady heart, your relaxed muscles, all feeding back to your brain and shaping your experience. When you feel anxious, that's your sympathetic system, your quickened breath, your tense muscles, your elevated heart rate, all feeding back as well. The body and the mind are not two things, they are one thing, seen from different angles. The body is the mind, seen from the outside. The mind is the body, seen from the inside. And when you lie down to sleep, you are asking the whole system, body, and mind to shift its state, to move from the alert, active daytime pattern to the quiet, restful nighttime pattern. And the system knows how to do this. It has been doing it every night of your life. Sleep itself is not a simple thing. It's a cycle, and it repeats several times each night, in a pattern that has been studied and mapped. The first stage is light sleep, the drifting, floating state where you're still aware of the room around you and could be woken easily. Then comes deeper sleep, where the brain's activity slows, the body's temperature drops, and the body does much of its repair work, rebuilding tissues, releasing growth hormone, clearing waste from the brain. Then comes rapid eye movement sleep, the dreaming stage, where the brain becomes active again, the eyes move under closed lids, and the muscles of the body are temporarily paralyzed, so you don't act out your dreams. Each cycle lasts about 90 minutes, and over the course of the night, the proportions change. Early in the night, there's more deep sleep. Later, there's more dreaming, and all of it is necessary, in ways that science is still trying to understand. What we know is that sleep is not a passive state. It's an active process, a kind of maintenance and restoration, a time when the body and the brain organize themselves, consolidate memories, clear away metabolic waste, and prepare for the next day. When you sleep, you are not doing nothing. You are doing the most important thing. And the body knows how to move towards sleep. It knows how to let the heart slow, the breath deepen, the muscles loosen, the attention soften. It knows how to dim its own lights, so to speak. The hypothalamus, that small structure we mentioned earlier, contains the master clock, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which keeps time with the day and the night, responding to light and dark, and orchestrates the release of melatonin, the hormone of sleepiness. As evening falls, melatonin rises, the body's temperature drops slightly, the alertness systems in the brainstem quiet, and the pull towards sleep grows stronger. This is a natural rhythm, older than humanity, and it will happen whether you try to make it happen or not. You can help it along by being still, by dimming the lights, by letting your thoughts drift, but you cannot force it. And you don't need to force it. Sleep comes, in its own time, and the body knows exactly how to do it. So as we come to the end of this long, slow walk through the body, there is nothing you need to remember. You don't need to remember the 4 kinds of tissue, or the names of the organelles, or the structure of the nephron, or the pathway of the blood. You don't need to remember any of it. The point was never to fill your head with facts. The point was to give your mind something soft and slow to rest on, while your body did what it already knows how to do. And perhaps, along the way, you caught a glimpse of something, the faint outline of your own body as a whole, a warm, breathing, beating, living thing, made of millions of small parts, all working together in silence. That's a good thought to rest on. It's a good thought to fall asleep to. If you'd like to come back to any of this while you're awake, the No Fluff Anatomy and Physiology Guide is at the link in the description, and it covers the same ground in a form you can actually read. And if you'd like the same subject taught properly, while you're fully awake and able to take notes, there is a companion channel called No Fluff Academy, where the material is presented for study rather than for sleep. But neither of those things is for tonight. Tonight is for resting. Tonight is for letting the body do its quiet work, and letting the mind drift, and letting the weight of the day settle away. So settle in, wherever you are. Feel the bed, or the chair, or the floor, holding you up. Feel the breath moving in and out, slow and easy, doing its work without you. Feel the warmth of your own body, the softness of the blanket, the coolness of the air on your face. There is nowhere else you need to be. There is nothing else you need to do. The body is complete, and it is working, and it will keep working while you sleep. The cells are dividing. The blood is moving, the heart is beating, the lungs are breathing, the neurons are firing, slowly now, gently now, settling into the quiet rhythms of the night. And you are here, inside all of it, and all of it is you. And it is all of it, entirely, quietly, marvelously fine.